Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in for Richard French on a very busy Thursday. We've got the final night of the Republican National Convention, which kicks off a few hours from now. The police shooting of an African-American man in Wisconsin spurring huge protests, riots, followed by another shooting, this one deadly, involving a pseudo-militia teenager. Pro athletes then refusing to play as a result. And there's also Laura, the major hurricane battering Louisiana and parts of Texas and moving north. Let's start there with Laura. It has now been downgraded to a tropical storm, but Laura made landfall as one of the most powerful storms in American history, a Category 4 hurricane, packing winds in excess of 140 miles an hour. While Louisiana took a direct hit, the greater Houston area was largely spared. We'll have more on the storm and how communities are trying to recover a little bit later on in the program. First, though, we pivot to politics. Vice President Mike Pence driving home the GOP's message at the Republican National Convention last night.
Last week, Joe Biden didn't say one word about the violence and chaos engulfing cities across this country. So let me be clear. The violence must stop, whether in Minneapolis, Portland, or Kenosha. We will have law and order on the streets of this country for every American of every race and creed and color.
No question where the vice president stands on Kenosha. The RNC was also very heavy on women last night, and the speakers tried to humanize and soften the president, telling stories about his kindness to them and how he's elevated women at the White House. But New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik and Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee delivered the red meat, talking about things like the impeachment sham and fears that Joe Biden will send us down the road to communism. And there's a chance we're going to hear more of that rhetoric tonight. We'll hear from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Rudy Giuliani, HUD Secretary Ben Carson, Ivanka Trump, and of course her father, the president, as he formally accepts the nomination. By the way, we'll begin our coverage at 10 p.m. Eastern tonight. And we have some excerpts of the president's speech that he's going to deliver. Among his lines, quote, "At no time before have voters faced a clearer choice between two parties, two visions, two philosophies, or two agendas." Trump is expected to say that we have spent the last 4 years reversing the damage Joe Biden inflicted over the last 47 years. At the Democratic convention, I'll say it correctly, you barely heard a word about their agenda, but that's not because they don't have one. He's going to say it's because their agenda is the most extreme set of proposals ever put forward by a major party nominee. We're also hearing that Trump will talk about the violence in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We'll do a deep dive on that in our next segment. Trump will likely take that same tough law and order stance we heard from Mike Pence last night. So today, the Democratic nominee for vice president offered a prebuttal on Kenosha.
We must always defend peaceful protest and peaceful protesters. We should not confuse them with those looting and committing acts of violence, including the shooter who was arrested for murder. And make no mistake, we will not let these vigilantes and extremists derail the path to justice.
Let's get into the convention now, and for that we bring in our guest, former Republican Congressman from Connecticut, Chris Shays, who has also said you are supporting Joe Biden in this year's election. We'll talk.
Hello over there.
Hi, it's
6 feet.
Yeah, but it's better than long distance.
Lovely. It's lovely.
Overall, what have you thought of the first 3 nights of the Republican
Well, first let me
convention?
say I thought the Democratic convention was really superb, and I have to tell you, I was thinking the Republicans couldn't come close, but in their own way, they may have trumped it in certain ways.
What's effective? What's worked for you?
Well, first off, they're creating a story that I think is false, but is reversing some of the reputation of the president and trying to say he's someone different. But they're doing it in an effective way. The scenery is fabulous, swearing in, future or then now American citizens.
Yeah.
You look at you're showing Pence there, and it was perfectly choreographed with the flags and the arch and everything. I mean, it's pretty, they've done a good job.
I want to get into some of the content, and one of the overarching themes that we've heard from the president's campaign and during this convention is let's just frighten suburban voters as best we can. That urban unrest is going to come to a suburb near you. The president has said so.
Well, that's close to being racist.
You represented a suburban district in Connecticut
Right.
for almost 22 years in Congress. You know suburban voters. Do you think that works on suburban voters in 2020?
Well, first off, I really represented 3 urban areas, Stamford, Norwalk, and Bridgeport. When I was a state rep, I represented the more residential part of Stamford. I view when he had the 2 white folks from St. Louis with their guns pointed at, one of their messages was, you better be careful because these people are going to come live in the suburbs. That's a subtle racist message, and
or not so subtle,
or not so subtle. But people can deny that it's racist. But to me, he's just making these little messages where the Democrats are very vulnerable is on the issue of law and order. And defunding the police, if you go into a black district, 80% want more police, not less. And when I was there, when we voted for the crime bill, by the way, the take was, oh, policemen are in the white districts, but they're not in the African-American districts. And so we started to move more into the African-American districts.
I'm curious because there's been I felt a lot of complaining coming from the Republican convention this year. They're very angry about the state of the country right now.
Yeah.
And I keep hearing about all of these flaws that the country has, which is a great argument if you're the outsider looking to knock off an incumbent. We need change. We need to change from where we are now. How do you make the argument that everything is awful, so you got to reelect me for 4 years?
Well, they're trying to say somewhat the opposite at the same time. They're trying to say we've had the best employment. We're dealing with the virus well. I mean, they're trying to take claim for very positive things, and at the same time, they're trying to say they're reversing the terrible things that Joe Biden did for 47 years.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
You mentioned the way that the convention looked and some of the imagery that they had. I'm not sure if I would call them stunts or not, but certainly some people have. The pardon that the president signed and staged for the convention, naturalizing new citizens.
Right.
That he did. Mike Pompeo speaking from Jerusalem. So we're looking through some of these highlights now. Using Fort McHenry, using the White House. Even the auditorium where the other guests are speaking, the Mellon Auditorium, is owned by the U.S. government. It may violate the Hatch Act, it may not. Nobody's going to enforce the Hatch Act. But as something of a traditionalist when it comes to the way our government runs.
I weep because
Why?
he's downgrading things that we have traditionally always respected. You don't use the White House. You don't use secretaries of state. You don't use the secretaries of different departments.
Is it just an unfair advantage because Joe Biden can't go out and pardon some guy for the Democratic convention, or is there something deeper than that?
Well, I just think it's a misuse of the campaign and of government facilities that other presidents never did. They would have been embarrassed to do it. But now that Donald Trump has done it, I can see Democrats doing it. So the bar has been lowered, not just for Donald Trump now, forever.
That's particularly scary because one of the concerns is using official actions in furtherance of your electoral advantage, like the post office.
It's one of the reasons why I don't support the president. I think he's dummied down things that we've always kind of felt were sacred duties of a president.
You said you think that the Democrats are susceptible on law and order issues, and there's an open question about that. I'll be fascinated to see how that plays out. Were you surprised by the zero sympathy shown by the vice president last night towards the protesters? Do you think that's a mistake? Even if you don't support their overall objective or you want to support the police, doesn't it make sense to at least show you're empathetic or sympathetic to what they're protesting about?
Empathy is the most important quality of any elected official because empathy means that you understand the people you're representing. You may not be able to solve all their problems, but at least tell me you understand what I'm going through. So, but he disguises it by speaking gently and then saying some nice platitude. So I'm not sure everybody catches the fact that he wasn't very empathetic.
There was a lot of speeches contained lines like, "You don't know the president the way I do."
I know.
He when he's away from the public, when he's behind closed doors, he's like a teddy bear.
And some of them are family members, and I want to throw up. I mean, think of all the people that are having to say this. Either his family members or in many cases, people that are paid by him to work for him.
The worst part for me is I don't even care if it's true. He's the president of the United States. I don't care how he is behind closed doors. I don't care how he acts, assuming that he acts in a civil manner. I don't care how he acts when nobody's watching. I care what he does and he says when he's in front of the public, when he's addressing the nation.
Well, then they're trying to say he's just tough, So, I think they have taken the biggest weaknesses of the president, tried to turn them around, and I think they've done it very effectively. And if Donald Trump is smart, President Trump is smart, what he'll do is not say stupid things for the next, 60 days or so?
I don't know if he's going to not say stupid things for the next 5 hours.
Well, if he was able to show a little more control in the future, he will win the election.
Other than Kimberly Guilfoyle yelling at the entire nation, any moments that stick in your mind as being particularly bad or particularly good from this week?
Well, both his sons I thought were somewhat obnoxious. It's almost like, how dare you do this to our dad? You owe it to our dad. And even, by the way, when he was swearing in the various new Americans, what he was looking for was praise me. It was praise me. So they were all there to praise him. It wasn't about them. In the end, it was about Donald Trump. So that, to me, is not someone with empathy.
Even to the point where the official logo of the convention, they altered it to put Trump's name on top of the original logo is the elephant that they had there, and then they made it 2020, the Republican convention.
This is not the Republican Party we're talking about. This is the Donald Trump Party. That's another reason I don't support him.
And that's another conversation that I'm looking forward to having with you in just a few minutes. So stay with us, Chris, if you will. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, so many questions about the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, and also the 2 people killed during a night of protests days later. A former NYPD officer joins us to break down and hopefully help us come to some answers.